Have you ever watched helplessly as someone deliberately drove their luxury SUV over your disabled child, and then had the gall to blame him for being in her way? Because I have. And her name was Diane. Diane Harrington, president of our HOA and self-appointed suburban dictator, committed vehicular manslaughter light with a smile on her face and a Range Rover under her butt. Let me rewind. My name's James Mitchell. I'm 47. SWAT commander. 22 years in law enforcement. Widower. And more importantly, dad to a 12-year-old named Alex, a whip-smart, sarcastic little dude with cerebral palsy and a wheelchair that costs more than Diane's monthly Botox budget. We moved to Oakwood Estates, Colorado. Why? The school district. They've got one of the best special education programs in the state. I wanted Alex to thrive. What I didn't know was that the moment we crossed into this over-landscaped Stepford nightmare, we also entered Diane's turf, and Diane. She runs the HOA like a third-world dictatorship run by a Pinterest board. Meet Diane Harrington. She's 50. Drives a white Range Rover with a vanity plate that says, OAKWD1, which tells you just about everything you need to know. Always has a clipboard. Always has a complaint. And always, ready to enforce bylaws like they're the 10 Commandments handed to her personally by the ghost of Martha Stewart. She's the kind of woman who probably files noise complaints against birds. Over the past year, Diane made it her full-time hobby to remind us we didn't fit in. She fined us for Alex's wheelchair ramp, which, by the way, is ADA compliant. She complained about his physical therapy deliveries. And once cited us for having unsightly medical equipment visible from the street. Spoiler alert, that equipment was an oxygen tank. Saturday morning, the day it all went down. It started like any other weekend. Alex was outside, practicing his mobility routine. He's been working on turns, precision stops, slope control. He's actually gotten really good at it. The kid could parallel park better than half the people in this neighborhood. I was inside making breakfast. Pancakes. Bacon. The usual dad stuff. Then I heard the horn. Not the polite, beep beep. No. This was the horn of entitlement. Prolonged. Aggressive. Like a war cry for middle-aged HOA supremacy. I ran out just in time to see Diane's Range Rover swerve onto the sidewalk. Yes, the sidewalk. Yes, the one my son was on. She clipped the side of Alex's wheelchair, sent him spinning, and pinned the front wheels underneath her massive SUV like she was auditioning for the role of unhinged Karen No. 4 in a made-for-TV courtroom drama. Alex was conscious. Barely. He was scared. Crying. But not screaming, kids tough as nails. I dropped to my knees and kicked into crisis mode. Controlled breathing. Assess vitals. Don't let your hands shake, James. You're trained for this. Meanwhile, Diane. Oh, Diane was still in her Range Rover, windows barely cracked like she was allergic to accountability, yelling through the 2-inch gap. You need to move him before he damages my custom bumper. You read that right. My son, pinned. Her concern. Her bumper. I looked up and locked eyes with her through her oversized sunglasses, you know, the kind that scream, I don't tip service workers. And all I could think was, lady, you just ran over a child. And you're worried about your paint job? Neighbors came out. Phones out. Whispers. Gasps. One woman started praying. A guy named Todd kept asking if he should call someone, which, we'll unpack Todd's usefulness later. I called 911 myself. I gave them my code clearance. Because here's the part Diane didn't know. I'm not just some dad with a wheelchair kid. I'm Commander James Mitchell, and I've led breaching operations on meth labs, hostage rescues in cartel territory, and a high-speed chase that ended with a suspect inside a livestock trailer. I've faced armed gunmen and domestic terrorists. But I've never been as enraged as I was watching that woman toss a violation notice on my lawn while paramedics were still cutting Alex out from under her car. Yes. You heard me right. As the EMTs were loading my son into the ambulance, Diane finally exited her vehicle. Not to check on the boy she nearly murdered. Not to apologize. But to hand me a notice of violation for unauthorized activities on community property. Unauthorized activities. Apparently, physical therapy counts as an HOA crime in Diane's suburban utopia. And that? That was the moment something shifted inside me. I've spent my career dismantling high-risk threats with discipline, patience, and precision. But nothing prepares you for the rage of watching your son get hurt by someone who sees him as an aesthetic inconvenience. Diane made one fatal mistake that day. She thought I was just some grieving widower. Some out-of-place working-class guy in her postcard neighborhood. She had no idea she had just started a war. With a man who leads tactical operations for a living. Who builds takedown strategies before his morning coffee. And who just watched his only son get hospitalized because of her ego. Ever dealt with an entitled HOA Karen who thought property lines were more important than people? Drop your horror stories in the comments, maybe we'll feature them next. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready to see Diane's Range Rover get repoed by karma and a court order. Because next time, we go full tactical. And Diane? She won't even see it coming. The ambulance pulled away with Alex inside. I stayed behind. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew if I got in that vehicle, I'd scare the hell out of my own kid with the rage boiling under my skin. He didn't need to see that. Not today. Diane was still on the sidewalk, flipping through her HOA binder like she was preparing to cite me for leaving emotional debris on her neighborhood curb. That woman didn't even glance at the tire marks she'd left on my son's wheelchair. Just snapped a photo, muttered something about property damage, and marched off in her orthopedic wedges like the queen of entitled gradients. I stood there a full 5 minutes after she disappeared, jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd crack a molar. And then I went inside, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just opened a notebook. And started writing. Some people process trauma by venting to friends. Some seek therapy. I write mission plans. You see, in my world, there are two types of responses, emotional and tactical. Emotional gets you a Twitter thread and a court date. Tactical gets you results. And Diane? She didn't need a tantrum. She needed a quiet, methodical takedown. I started by documenting everything. Dates, times, photos. I pulled the footage from my security cameras, multiple angles of her mounting the curb like she was in a monster truck rally. I time-stamped her approach, the moment of impact, the ridiculous horn, and, cherry on top, the exact second she tossed that notice on my lawn while my son was still in a neck brace. I printed it all. Then I did a little digging. Turns out Diane's HOA presidency wasn't exactly airtight. She'd been acting president for 3 years, after the last one resigned over an embezzlement scandal involving landscaping funds and a suspiciously expensive koi pond. Diane took over by default and kept postponing new elections. Her term limits were technically up 18 months ago. But no one noticed because no one wanted the job. That, right there, was leverage. Next, I started calling residents. The ones she'd find. The ones who'd gotten warnings for leaving Christmas lights up past January 2nd. The woman she shamed publicly at the HOA meeting for inadequate mulch coverage. Every single one of them had a story. Some were small annoyances. Others were borderline harassment. I kept notes. Compiled statements. Recorded phone calls, legally, of course. Colorado's a one-party consent state. After that, I went after the big guns, the county records. Diane's house. Not up to code. Her own wheelchair ramp, for her aging mother, ironically, was built without a permit. Her backyard shed. Encroaching on a utility easement. The cherry tree she brags about every spring. Planted illegally on common ground. She was a walking violation binder waiting to collapse under its own weight. But I didn't strike yet. No, no. You don't storm the compound the second you spot a weak fence. You map the entire perimeter. You study patrol routes. You wait for the exact moment they're too arrogant to see you coming. That moment came at the emergency HOA meeting. Diane had called it to discuss community safety protocols, which was code for, let's make sure disabled children don't roll their tragic little wheels near my Range Rover again. I showed up 5 minutes early, took the seat directly across from her, and said nothing. The meeting opened with the usual nonsense, garbage bin storage, someone's lawn gnome being spiritually aggressive, whatever. Then she shifted gears. Suggested restricting mobility devices in common areas for aesthetic cohesion and safety. That's when I stood up. I didn't yell. Didn't slam my fist. I just opened a manila envelope and began handing out copies. Photos. Witness statements. Footage stills. County code violations. HOA bylaws she had trampled in the name of hydrangea uniformity. Then I handed her a letter. It was a formal petition, signed by over 70% of the residents, demanding her immediate resignation and the scheduling of a proper HOA election. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Tried to stand. I calmly suggested she sit. Then I read a brief statement. Diane, on the morning of April 8, you struck a disabled child with your vehicle, failed to render aid, and instead issued a fine for an ADA-compliant therapy session. You then continued to serve in a position of power you no longer legally hold. This is not a neighborhood. It's a hostage situation with landscaping. The room went dead silent. She sputtered something about defamation, but I reminded her this wasn't a criminal hearing, yet. This was a democratic process. One she had long ignored. I gave her a choice, resign peacefully and quietly fade into the HOA memory hole, or face a public vote that would air every single skeleton she'd ever hidden under her seasonal wreaths. She resigned that night. Effective immediately. Her Range Rover. Towed 3 days later for unpaid tickets and expired registration. The same bumper that crunched my kid's wheelchair got hauled off by a rusted municipal tow truck with a driver named Lou who, bless him, took photos for the gram. I visited Alex in the hospital that evening. He was groggy but smiling, arm in a sling, knees bandaged. I told him Diane wouldn't be bothering us anymore. He blinked, then whispered, "Did you, SWAT her or something?" I smiled. "Something like that, buddy." That night, I stood in our driveway. Quiet. Still. Watching the moonlight bounce off our freshly repaired wheelchair ramp. The neighborhood was calm. Peaceful. No clipboards. No Range Rovers. Just silence, and the faint smell of mulch. I wasn't just a dad anymore. I was the man who reminded Diane, and the rest of Oakwood Estates, that some fences aren't meant to keep people out. They're meant to keep people like her from running over anyone else ever again. Day 1 of Operation Accountability started with a certified letter. Diane probably expected a cease and desist or another strongly worded complaint from some homeowner begging her to stop measuring their grass height with a ruler. What she actually got was a formal notice of legal action, a copy of a federal ADA complaint, and a cheerful little cover letter from my neighbor Tom, a civil rights attorney who makes most of his living suing municipalities for fun and profit. She didn't know it yet, but the fuse was lit. In my office, a converted garage with a "Don't tread on me unless you want a tactical response" mug on the desk, I set up a whiteboard. Columns, legal, financial, media, and community. Color-coded magnets. Index cards. Photos. Timelines. If Diane thought HOA politics were her battlefield, I was bringing her to mine. I started where I'm strongest, intel and coordination. Marcus, my second-in-command and longtime friend, quietly canvassed the neighborhood, gathering witness statements. Not just about the incident, but everything. Prior harassment. Racial profiling. Ableist comments. Threats. Fines that mysteriously disappeared if the resident attended her weekly coffee with the Queen social hours. He wasn't just gathering dirt. He was documenting a pattern. Meanwhile, Sarah, our department tech specialist and the type of person who could retrieve deleted emails from a toaster if necessary, dug into Diane's digital footprint. Her HOA emails were a goldmine of casual cruelty, backhanded threats, and one particularly telling message: we need to discourage the pity parade families from lowering property values. Yeah. She typed that. Hit send. No shame. No password protection. Just HOA Karen energy radiating in Comic Sans. Next, Tom filed the real paperwork. First, a personal injury lawsuit. Damages for Alex's injuries, destruction of medical equipment, and emotional distress. Total value. High six figures, possibly 7. Especially after the pediatric trauma therapist submitted their report. Second, a federal ADA complaint against both Diane and the HOA board for repeated violations, harassment, and failure to accommodate. That included citations for the previous, unsightly wheelchair ramp violations she'd handed out like candy at a dystopian Halloween. Third, a civil rights complaint with the Department of Justice. Because when you use your position of authority to systematically target vulnerable families, you don't just get a slap on the wrist, you get the full alphabet soup of federal enforcement. And just for fun, Tom initiated an insurance fraud investigation. Because Diane had claimed Alex damaged her vehicle when she swerved into him like she was auditioning for the next Fast and Furious HOA drift installment. Her insurance adjuster had already flagged the claim as suspicious. That was just the legal track. Then came the media strategy. We weren't going scorched earth. Not yet. We just lit a few controlled fires. Enter Melissa Rivera. Investigative journalist. Known for two things: relentless reporting on disability rights, and the kind of voice that could make a congressional hearing sound like a bedtime story. I didn't dump the whole situation in her lap. That's not how you handle press. I gave her a teaser: upscale Colorado community accused of targeting disabled child in HOA dispute. Included a few documents. Blurred footage. The good stuff. She bit. And the gears started turning. Meanwhile, the community began to splinter. You see, Diane ruled through fear. Most folks didn't like her, they just didn't want to be her next target. But now that people were seeing the footage, hearing the stories, watching their HOA dues being spent on Range Rover tire rotations and artisanal bird feeders for her therapeutic finches, the tide began to turn. One of the board members, a mild-mannered dentist who once got fined for leaving his recycling bin visible from the sidewalk, quietly reached out. Just wanted you to know, he said, I never supported her proposal about the wheelchair ban. Of course he didn't. But now he had the guts to say it out loud. Diane, as expected, doubled down. She called another emergency meeting. Proposed banning recreational wheelchair use on sidewalks due to safety concerns and traffic flow disruption. She claimed Alex's therapy exercises created a dangerous precedent and implied we were using his condition for emotional leverage. At this point, even her most loyal followers started looking uncomfortable. But just in case anyone still needed convincing, Marcus delivered the final payload. Turns out Diane had done this before. Not once. Twice. 2 other neighborhoods. 2 other HOA reigns of terror. Both communities showed similar signs: complaints, resignations, and quiet settlements. One even had a sealed record involving a minor pedestrian incident and a curiously well-timed move across state lines. Marcus uncovered financial irregularities in those HOAs, too. Renovations. Lost funds. Private contractors with no records. And wouldn't you know it, the same contractor company that redid Diane's marble kitchen here in Oakwood had billing records buried deep in HOA reimbursement logs, filed under emergency plumbing assessment. It was like finding a rat in your pantry, then discovering it had been subletting the place to other rodents. So I brought it all to the next HOA meeting, along with Tom and a very special guest, a representative from the state attorney general's office. Diane started off like she always did. Smug, confident, reading from her notes like the Constitution had been written on a napkin at a wine tasting. But when the AG's rep cleared her throat and introduced herself, Diane's face went full freezer aisle. We are investigating multiple allegations of housing discrimination, misuse of public funds, and ADA violations, she said flatly. You may wish to retain counsel. That's when Diane panicked. And filed a restraining order against me and Alex. Claimed we were harassing her. Said she feared for her life and that my son was emotionally unstable. She used her friend the police chief, her golf buddy, to fast-track it. And for 48 hours, we were legally barred from going within 500 feet of our own home. I'd like to say I was shocked. I wasn't. Because what Diane didn't realize was that her restraining order was the legal equivalent of stepping on a rake you laid out yourself. She just opened the door to countersuit territory. To public hearings. To forensic analysis of every communication she'd ever sent while in her position. She thought she was playing checkers. I was playing tactical chess with night vision goggles and a four-man breach team on standby. And as I packed a bag for Alex and me to crash at Marcus's house for a few days, I smiled. Not because I was happy. But because I knew what came next. She thought she'd finally won. But I was just clearing the battlefield. Because when the dust settled, there'd be no more queen on this HOA board. Just justice. And possibly a garage sale. We didn't go home for 3 days. Alex didn't complain once. He asked if we were on a mission, and I told him yes. Because we were. He didn't need to know all the legal details, he just needed to know Dad had a plan. And that I wasn't going to let anyone hurt him without consequences. Back at home, Diane was doing victory laps. She'd told the local paper I had threatened her family, claimed she'd feared for her safety during a confrontation with a hostile parent, and that the restraining order was a necessary protective measure. I found out she was rehearsing a press conference. She even had flyers printed with her new slogan, "Protecting our neighborhood, one rule at a time." That slogan didn't last 24 hours. Because while Diane was out there crafting her martyrdom arc, Tom was finalizing the discovery requests. And once the court granted access to HOA communications, all the skeletons came pouring out of her walk-in closet, including her attempts to use HOA funds to reimburse herself for a spa trip to Sedona, which she filed under mental wellness strategy research. Then the footage dropped. Melissa's piece aired on a Friday night, right after the local news. 10 minutes of body cam, cell phone video, and neighborhood interviews. They cut the audio to Alex's cries. Let the silence hang in the air as Diane's voice rang out, "Children like that shouldn't be in public unsupervised." They didn't need to embellish. Reality was damning enough. By Saturday morning, it had over 1.2 million views. By Sunday, the neighborhood was putting up "We Stand with Alex" signs. Handmade. Printed. One guy built a plywood billboard on his lawn. HOA bylaws be damned. Then came the AG's move. They filed charges, willful misconduct, financial fraud, and civil rights violations. Diane's mugshot didn't go viral, exactly, but it circulated just enough. Especially once people started digging into her past. Turns out the contractor shell company that had been funneling money from 3 different HOAs, registered in her cousin's name, with a fake address that was actually a P.O. box inside a tanning salon. The state froze HOA assets. The board resigned, one by one, like rats leaving a yacht. They torched themselves. Except for the dentist. He stayed, shaking hands at neighborhood cookouts, looking like a man who just beat a terminal disease called cowardice. I walked into court with Alex and a new attorney, ADA specialist, former federal prosecutor, and the kind of guy who wore $800 suits like he'd slept in them because he was too busy writing constitutional briefs at 3 a.m. Diane's lawyer tried to argue that the restraining order was necessary for her mental health. Our side brought receipts. By the time the judge vacated the order and returned full residency to me and my son, Diane wouldn't even look in our direction. Her house went up for sale a week later. No goodbye note. No apology. Just a pending sign and a moving truck filled with tastefully neutral furniture and the ashes of her suburban empire. But I wasn't finished. See, this wasn't just about Diane. It never was. This was about a system that empowered people like her. Gave them rulebooks and clipboards and let them masquerade as leadership. So I ran. For HOA president. No, not because I wanted the job. God, no. But someone needed to make sure this never happened again. That no kid was ever told they were a burden, because their therapy took place on a sidewalk instead of in silence. We rewrote the bylaws. Added a disability accommodation clause with teeth. We set up a neighborhood fund for accessibility renovations, paid out of what used to be Diane's landscaping micro-infractions racket. And every month, Alex and I host a sidewalk day. He rides. Kids join. No rules, no fines, no clipboards. Just chalk and laughter and wheels spinning under Colorado sun. And one more thing. Diane tried to countersue. Claimed she was the real victim. Said she was driven from her home by a coordinated harassment campaign, which was a bold claim, considering she left behind 4 terabytes of evidence that she was the one doing the harassing. The judge dismissed it with prejudice. Called it a frivolous attempt to deflect from a consistent pattern of targeted discrimination. We framed that page. It's in the hallway, next to Alex's drawings and my old badge. People still stop me sometimes. Ask how it all happened. How we took down a suburban tyrant without firing a shot. I tell them the truth. I didn't do it alone. I had a team. I had the law. I had a neighborhood that remembered what community means. And most of all, I had a reason. He's 8 years old. He loves dinosaurs, hates broccoli, and thinks wheelies are a form of protest. And no one, not a bully in a Range Rover, not a clipboard queen with a legal pad, not a corrupt HOA board, is going to tell him where he's allowed to be. Because this is our home. And we're not going anywhere. Diane made one last play. She tried to run. Packed up her Range Rover like she was prepping for a desert retreat, yoga mat, designer luggage, 3 boxes of gluten-free crackers, and exactly 0 moral accountability. Unfortunately for her, Colorado state troopers have less patience for HOA embezzlers than most people have for pyramid scheme invites. She didn't even make it past the county line. They pulled her over outside a gas station just south of Castle Rock. She was wearing a matching athleisure set and aviators like she was headed to brunch in Scottsdale instead of fleeing felony charges. The Range Rover was impounded. She was cuffed on the spot. The charges? Assault with a deadly weapon, attempted insurance fraud, embezzlement of HOA funds, and, cherry on top, civil rights violations under federal ADA statutes. Justice moves slowly, sure. But when it finally lands, it hits like a breaching ram. Back home, we returned to something I hadn't felt in a long time, a community that gave a damn. The first morning back, Alex wheeled down the sidewalk to find our neighbors, people we barely knew 6 months ago, had added murals to the pavement. Dinosaurs, rocket ships, a giant message in rainbow chalk, welcome home, Alex. I won't lie. I teared up. And I don't tear up easily. I've seen hostage standoffs, disaster zones, and once, a bachelorette party in Reno that still haunts my dreams. But this? This hit me somewhere deeper. Our house had changed too. While we were gone, a group of volunteers, organized by Tom, naturally, worked with an accessibility nonprofit to remodel the front entrance. Smoother ramp, widened doorways, voice-controlled smart locks, and a motion-activated light system that doesn't require Alex to strain his hands. It was like someone had finally asked, what would make your life easier, and then actually did it. The trial came 2 months later. Diane showed up in pearls and courtroom beige, trying to look like a misunderstood retiree instead of a Range Rover vigilante with a clipboard fetish. It didn't work. The prosecution played the footage. Witnesses testified. The financial records spoke louder than her defense team ever could. When they read off the list of charges and accompanying sentences, totaling 18 years with no possibility of parole for the violent offense, she just stared ahead, like someone watching their stock portfolio tank in real time. We didn't celebrate. Justice isn't a party. But I did sleep better that night than I had in months. Civil court came next. Tom Peterson, God bless him, made sure the damages included full replacement value for Alex's wheelchair, punitive penalties for emotional trauma, and, my personal favorite, treble damages under ADA law for willful neglect. Total judgment? $740,000. And yes, the insurance company seized the Range Rover as part of the fraud settlement. Last I heard, it's being repurposed as a fire department training prop. Fitting. But this story isn't just about taking something away. It's about what we built after. The neighborhood elected a new HOA board. Diverse, pragmatic, and, crucially, not allergic to common decency. I refused the presidency but agreed to be an advisor. My only demand? Monthly accessibility audits and mandatory civil rights training for every board member. They agreed unanimously. We created a community emergency response team. I ran the training myself, trauma management, de-escalation tactics, even basic ADA guidelines. We've already had 2 successful interventions, a power outage where we got a backup generator to a disabled resident, and a lost child reunited with his mom thanks to a neighbor who learned to sign, "Are you okay?" in ASL. Alex, meanwhile, has transformed. He still has scars, physical, emotional, but he's also found a voice. He started speaking at schools. Tells his story, shows off his new wheelchair, nicknamed the Falcon, by the way, and talks about kindness, inclusion, and how not all heroes wear capes. Some use joystick controls and a killer sense of humor. He even gave a TEDx talk. I had to sit in the back so I wouldn't embarrass him. Or cry. Or both. And as for me, I turned all of this into something useful. Developed a training program for law enforcement on HOA-related conflict de-escalation and disability awareness. Rolled it out statewide. I get calls from other precincts asking, "Hey, what do we do when a homeowner says the wheelchair ramp violates grass uniformity codes?" I tell them, you tell them to sit down, shut up, and maybe read the Americans with Disabilities Act before someone drops a lawsuit on their perfectly manicured lawn. 1 year later, we threw a block party. No clipboards, no citations, no Range Rovers parked like tanks across the sidewalk. Just kids, music, burgers, and Alex doing wheelies while every other kid tried to match him. Someone gave me a beer and said, "You really turned this place around." But the truth is, I didn't do it alone. We all did. One protest sign, one chalk dinosaur, one legal filing at a time. Oh, and the final irony? A letter arrived 3 weeks ago. From prison. Diane. Or as she now refers to herself, inmate Harrington. Turns out the correctional facility isn't exactly ADA optimized. She's developed a mobility issue and is requesting reasonable accommodation under federal law. I read the letter twice, then passed it along to the state. With it, I attached accessibility guidelines, a polite note, and a P.S. Justice means everyone gets what they're owed. Even those who once thought justice didn't apply to them. So, if you've ever been steamrolled by someone in power, someone who hides behind rules they only enforce when it suits them, remember this. You don't have to match their cruelty. You just have to outlast it. Outthink it. And when the time comes, outmaneuver it with everything the system should be: honest, deliberate, and unflinching. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a world where people like that don't get to hold power in the first place. And watching from your porch, cold drink in hand, as your son rolls by with a grin that says, "We won." Because we did.